I found out my family had sold the house I grew up in through a text message that read, "Congratulations, we finally sold it. One less thing to worry about." What none of them knew, not my mother, not my father, not my brother who signed the papers on their behalf, was that the ground underneath that house had belonged to me since I was 11 years old, and the sale they were celebrating was about to collapse in front of a room full of lawyers in front of me. I want to tell you exactly how it happened because the ending still doesn't feel real to me even now. My name is Marisol Adair, I'm 31, and I work as a land title examiner in Spokane, Washington, which means I spend my days reading deeds most people never think to check. That skill was about to turn my own family's celebration into the worst afternoon of their lives. And to understand why my grandfather split that property the way he did, you have to go back 17 years, to a kitchen table in Kettle Falls where he sat me down with a folder I was too young to understand. My grandfather, Walton Reyes, owned 12 acres out past the county line, land his own father had cleared by hand, and when my parents built their house on a corner of it, he did something nobody in the family knew about for over a decade. He deeded that specific parcel, the ground the house sat on, directly to me, placed in a trust that would release full ownership on my 25th birthday. He told me once, sitting on that porch with his coffee going cold, that land was the one thing nobody could talk you out of if your name was already on the paper. My parents kept the house, the structure, the mortgage, everything above ground. But the dirt beneath their feet, the 12 acres their entire life was built on, was quietly legally mine. Nobody ever brought it up again after that afternoon, not my parents, not my grandfather before he passed, not even me, because for years it simply didn't matter. I turned 25, the trust closed, the deed transferred cleanly into my name, and I filed the paperwork the way anyone in my profession would, methodically, and then I let it sit. I never mentioned it at Thanksgiving. I never brought it up when my parents complained about property taxes. It felt like a strange inheritance to announce, the kind of thing that would only start arguments nobody needed. So I stayed quiet, moved 2 hours away for work, and let my family go on believing what they had always believed, that the house on Larkspur Road, the one with my height marks penciled inside the pantry door, belonged entirely to them. 3 years ago, my father's knees finally gave out from decades of construction work, and the conversations at family dinners shifted from complaints about taxes to something heavier, something about downsizing, about a house too big for 2 people, about maybe it was time. I didn't think much of it. Parents talk about selling the family home the way people talk about running a marathon someday, mostly out loud, rarely with a real date attached. My brother Dominic, 34 and always the one my parents trusted with paperwork, started handling more of their affairs, driving up from Coeur d'Alene on weekends to help with bills, insurance, the things that pile up when a body starts failing before a mind does. I was grateful, honestly. I was 2 hours away with a demanding job, and Dominic stepping in felt like relief, not a threat. That trust is exactly what makes what happened next so hard to forgive. The text came on a Tuesday in March, while I was 3 cups of coffee deep into a title search for a completely unrelated property, a habit that would matter more than I could have guessed. My mother's message read simply, "Congratulations, we finally sold it. Closing is Friday. One less thing to worry about." I remember reading it twice, certain I'd missed an earlier conversation, some group chat message I'd scrolled past. I called my mother immediately, and she sounded lighter than I'd heard her in years, explaining that a young couple named the Halversons had offered full asking price, $340,000 cash, no contingencies, and Dominic had handled the entire process because, in her words, "You're always so busy, sweetheart, we didn't want to bother you." I later learned exactly how that had happened so fast. Dominic had never listed the house with a real agency at all. He'd found a small private buyer's agent through a coworker, someone who specialized in quick, as is cash deals for sellers who wanted to skip the usual months of showings, and that kind of transaction moves differently than a normal sale. There's no open listing pulling public attention, no early title commitment ordered weeks in advance, just a private agreement and a rushed closing date, with the title search often ordered late and read for the first time in the room, because everyone involved was more interested in speed than in slowing down to check the paperwork properly. Bother me. About the house I grew up in. Sold to strangers I'd never heard of, closing in 3 days, and my own name never once mentioned in the process, because as far as anyone in my family knew, I had no reason to be mentioned at all. I sat in my office chair for a long moment after that call, feeling something cold settle low in my stomach, not anger yet, Just a professional instinct clicking into place. The same instinct that catches a misfiled easement or a lien nobody bothered to clear. I opened my own county's title portal, pulled up the parcel number I still had memorized from the trust paperwork 7 years earlier, and there it was in black and white, exactly as my grandfather had arranged it. The house, the driveway, the exact footprint my parents believed they were selling, sat on a parcel deeded solely to Marisol Adair. No other names attached, no joint ownership, nothing my parents could sign away no matter how many papers Dominic had helped them stack. My family was 3 days from closing on a sale of land they had never legally owned, and not one of them had any idea. I want to be honest about the choice sitting in front of me right then because it wasn't simple, and I don't want you to think it was. I could have called my mother back within the hour, explained everything gently, let her cancel quietly before anyone got embarrassed. Some part of me wanted to, but I wasn't trying to punish anyone, and I want that understood clearly because this wasn't about revenge. It was about 7 years of being the daughter nobody thought to call, the one assumed too busy to matter, and some part of me needed to know honestly and finally whether anyone in that family would think to ask me a single question before signing away something that had my name on it. So I didn't hide anything or set a trap. I simply stopped doing what I had always done, which was step in early and smooth things over before they became a problem. For once, I let the silence be theirs to sit in, not mine, and I let Friday come. The closing was scheduled at a title office in downtown Spokane, and I stood in the hallway outside it, having called ahead using my professional credentials to confirm exactly when the file would be pulled for final review. Through the half-open door I watched Renata Cho, the title officer, a woman I'd met twice at industry conferences, start reading through the preliminary report before the ink went anywhere near a signature line. I watched her pause. I watched her ask, in the calm, careful voice title officers use right before they ruin someone's afternoon, why the underlying parcel was recorded under a completely different name than the sellers present at the table. The room went silent and my father's voice cracked through it, certain there had to be some clerical error, because that house had been in his family for 30 years. Renata read the name off the deed slowly like a verdict, and I heard my mother's chair scrape back, heard Dominic demand to know what that even meant, heard the Halversons' realtor start asking whether this closing was happening at all. That's when I opened the door and walked in, and I want you to picture the exact moment 4 faces turned toward me at once, because in that instant, the daughter they'd forgotten to include in a $340,000 decision was the only person in the room who could tell them what was actually happening to their lives. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned that calm unsettles people far more than shouting ever does, and I had 31 years of practice keeping mine level. I told them plainly that the parcel their entire house sat on had been deeded to me by Grandpa Walton when I was 11, that the trust had closed clean 6 years earlier, and that legally, nobody at that table had the authority to sell the ground beneath their feet, because it had never belonged to them in the first place. My mother's face did something I'll never forget, disbelief sliding into something closer to betrayal, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. My father asked quietly why I had never said anything, and I told him the truth, that I never saw a reason to, right up until the reason walked itself into a title office and tried to sell my land out from under me without a single phone call. Dominic recovered fastest the way he always does. "Why would you let it get this far?" he snapped. "You saw the listing. You could have called." I looked at him and asked one question back. "How many of my calls did you actually pick up in the last 7 years, Dominic?" He didn't answer. Nobody at that table remembered the dinner years earlier, when I'd mentioned once that Grandpa's trust had finally released. Nobody had been listening closely enough to remember it, because I had never been the child anyone expected to matter in a decision this size, and my quiet compliance for 7 straight years had trained every one of them to stop checking. The sale did not close that day, and it never closed at all, because no title company in the state would ensure a transfer built on a deed that plainly excluded the sellers. The Halversons walked away furious, and reasonably so, out the earnest money they'd already spent on inspections. My parents spent the following weeks in a kind of stunned quiet I'd never seen from either of them, my father repeating that he simply didn't understand how none of them had known, my mother alternating between apologizing and defending herself in the same breath, telling me I should have said something sooner, as if the omission had ever been mine to fix. Dominic stopped calling for nearly a month, which honestly felt like the first peace I'd had from him in years. What happened after that is the part one actually want you to hear, because it isn't the part people expect. I didn't take the house from them out of spite, and I never once threatened to. Instead, I sat down with my parents at their kitchen table, the same table my grandfather once used to explain trusts to an 11-year-old. And I offered them something Dominic never could have, a long-term lease on the land at a fair, fixed rate, low enough that they could stay in the only home they'd ever known for as long as they wanted it. My father cried at that table. The first time I'd seen him cry since Grandpa Walton's funeral, not because I'd been generous, he said, but because he finally understood that I had never once been the child who didn't matter, only the child nobody had bothered to ask. My parents still live in that house today, and every month a modest lease payment comes to me instead of a mortgage payment going nowhere. And honestly, it's the first time money has ever moved through this family in a direction that made sense. Dominic and I speak now, carefully, the way people do when trust has to be rebuilt one small conversation at a time instead of assumed. My mother has started calling before making any decision that touches property, insurance, or anything with my name buried somewhere in the paperwork, which still makes me laugh a little, given how long it took to get there. And every so often, when I drive out past the county line to check on the land the way my grandfather once did, I think about that folder on his kitchen table, and I understand now that he wasn't just giving me 12 acres that day. He was making sure that no matter how invisible this family made me feel for the rest of my life, there would always be one piece of ground nobody could sell without my name on it. If a story like this one hits somewhere honest, subscribe to Comtail Stories, because every week we uncover the quiet, complicated moments where families discover exactly what they overlooked, and trust me, the next story is one you will not see coming either.